Welcome to this sponsored episode of Lifetime Talks. I'm Jamie Martin.
And I'm David Freeman.
And in this episode, we are talking all about ketones and how they can help support clarity and resilience. We know that people want to feel clear, steady, resilient. And today and over the long haul, we want them to feel their best. So, emerging research is showing how ketones do more than provide fuel. They actually act as signaling molecules that can support cognitive steadiness, inflammation balance, mitochondrial function, and metabolic flexibility, among other things. This episode, we're really going to be focusing on grounding the conversation in the science while talking about how daily ketone intake is a simple, sustainable habit that can really support a long, healthy life. So, with that, David, I'm excited for you to introduce our two guests today.
Yes, we have two amazing guests from Kinetic. We got Brandon Dykstra-House. He's the head of nutrition. And we also have the CEO, Devin Price, in the building. And y'all, just to set the stage, what are ketones? And we know that people are constantly talking about them. And what Jamie just kind of alluded to as far as focus, energy, long-term health are just a few benefits that we hear about in this space. We're excited to have you both on. We'll go ABC order. Brandon, that's going to be you coming out the gates. What are ketones and why are people constantly talking about them nowadays?
Well, David, great question. And for the longest time, most people thought that you had to be on a strict keto diet to get the benefits of ketones. But that's not actually how it works. When you drink Kinetic, you're giving your body ketones directly, no diet change required. And it doesn't matter if you've had oatmeal for breakfast or if you've had a sandwich for lunch, your body just naturally absorbs them. This raises your blood ketone levels, and your brain and body has access to that fuel within 30 minutes time. So if you want mental clarity, the focus benefits, and you have zero interest in cutting carbs, you can just drink it. I think Devin would probably go more into the science side, but for me, it's like we have a product now that allows you to open up the opportunity of having that metabolic flexibility just by consuming a drinkable product.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ketones are a fuel source. I like to think of them as a nutrient, similar to carbohydrates or protein or fats. Your fuel, your cells actually they use them to produce ATP, energy. So our bodies have evolved over millions of years to use ketones as a backup source of fuel because, historically we need to survive. We need to support the energy demands of particularly our large brains when food isn't available. So we convert fat into ketones when carbohydrates aren't available. So that's why you feel good when you're fasting after you've gotten over the initial hunger, pang part. You feel fresh. Your brain works like it's supposed to because it's being fueled with ketones.
Yeah. What's one of the biggest misconceptions you've heard about ketones? I mean, you've been doing this a long time. You're talking about like this nutrient as you referred to it. I mean, Brandon, you kind of said a little bit like, oh, people think you need to go into ketosis probably to have the benefits of them. But what is there anything else?
Yeah, generally that's the biggest myth. When we go to expos or events and we talk about Kinetic, people are generally familiar with the ketogenic diet. And look, ketones aren't just for people on the keto diet. It's where most people have heard of them, but the research on focus and mental clarity, that wasn't done on people avoiding carbs or being carb restricted. It was done on everyday people eating everyday food. So you think about going to Lifetime Cafe, doing what your kids do at school. It's those type of people. Um, the ketones, they're doing the work. These changes that Devin's going to describe later in the show, that it's not the diet. You don't have to change anything about how you feel or how you eat to notice a difference, which is really what makes them remarkable.
Yeah, I'd add that, one of the biggest misconceptions about ketones and Kinetic in particular is that it's just another energy drink in disguise. There's a real difference between ketones and caffeine or
Mhm.
other types of stimulants. There is no caffeine, no stimulants in Kinetic, and the mechanism is completely different. Stimulants work by triggering your adrenal system, So you get a
Mm.
spike and then a crash. Caffeine blocks sleep receptors, and those accumulate. And when it wears off, they all funnel in, and you hit the deck. So ketones actually are, again, a fuel source that provide real energy to your cells.
Mhm.
Mm. I like how you kind of set that up. You talked about within Kinetic how no caffeine, no sugar. What are some other things that helps separate what Kinetic has within its product versus the other things that are out there?
Well, in addition to the ketones themselves, it doesn't have anything artificial. It's a
Hmm.
very clean label. There's no artificial colors. Pour it out, and it's clear. No artificial flavors, no artificial sweeteners. So we don't use aspartame or anything like that. We use allulose, which is actually a very healthy,
Mhm.
no calorie sweetener. It's derived from plants. So yeah, it's a very clean, healthy product.
Mhm. One thing that we know that you talk about at Kinetic is that you took a science-first approach when you developed it. So tell us a little bit about why that was so important from a philosophy standpoint for you, Devin, when you started Kinetic.
Huh. Well, my background is as a scientist. I'm a scientist and engineer, and so that's just where my brain goes. And I got interested in ketones 7 years ago when I started this company. The first drinkable ketones had just been developed by it's funded by the military, a study done between NIH and Oxford, and they were looking for a super fuel for soldiers. They knew the power of ketones as a metabolite. The problem was we don't have access to them unless we're fasting typically or on a ketogenic diet, and that isn't compatible with most lifestyles, in particular, people in the military. So they said, what if we could create a drinkable ketone so that we could have carbohydrates and ketones at the same time? And it worked fantastic. It improved performance of soldiers. One of the studies that they did was with in the Arctic, where in extreme cold temperatures, your reaction time and your decision making speed, they fall off very quickly. But supplementing with ketones prevented that degradation
Mm.
altogether. And the other cool thing that it did was it opened up avenues for research into other health conditions like uh, dementia, Alzheimer's, cancer, diabetes, conditions that are really rooted in metabolic dysfunction. And I just got fascinated by this and went into a rabbit hole for 6 months, just reading everything. And the problem with and I wanted this to be I wanted it in my life. But the problem with those first drinkable ketones, the ketone esters, was they taste like nail polish remover.
Mm.
They're super expensive. The first ones were $80 a serving. They're still $30 a serving, so they're still super expensive. So not practical. And so decided to create something that tastes good, that's cost effective, and that works just as well. So my initial interest, and the only reason that I've dedicated so much time and I have so much passion around this, is because there is so much science, so much interesting science around ketones and how it works with your metabolism and all of the potential clinical benefits um, that come with it.
Yeah, Dev, just to piggyback off that, I love what you were talking about from the physicality piece of it. So any and everybody from the soldier um, project, if you will, it's another great benefit that I want to definitely make sure that we unpack, and we somewhat mentioned it earlier, mental performance. So we talked about physical performance, but the mental performance, when we talked about cognitive function and making sure that we're next level within that space, So I'll throw it at you, Devin or Brandon, as far as when it comes to the mental focus and clarity, how does it speak to the brain?
Well, ketones are your brain's preferred fuel source. So if you've got carbohydrates and ketones present at the same time, your brain will use ketones first.
Mm,
It's a very efficient fuel source, and it's very, very clean. When you think of carbohydrates, they when you use those for energy, it kicks off free radicals, oxidative stress, which damages adjacent cells, which leads to inflammation, which leads to brain fog. So ketones, carbohydrates are like a diesel truck. Ketones are like a Tesla, no
mm,
exhaust whatsoever. And, and in fact, they are also a signaling molecule. So they not only do they not produce inflammation through oxidative stress, they also regulate inflammation. So they activate your body's natural anti-inflammatory processes.
mm,
They also activate your body's natural antioxidant pathways.
mm,
So they are they are a they give your brain cells the resources that it needs,
mm,
the actual energy substrate to function effectively, and they modulate inflammation and keep your brain clear.
mm. Gotcha.
I mean, does that inflammation and whether Brandon or Devin jumping in on this, but, like, thinking about knowing how damaging inflammation is to the entire body, not just to the brain, right? Like, are there, body-wide effects from that as well, or is it mostly brain effects?
It's body wide. Yeah. So ketones actually block the NLRP inflammasome, which is the first step in the inflammatory process.
Mhm.
So that applies all, throughout your metabolism.
Awesome. Okay, so let's jump on that because you, Brandon and Devin, you've mentioned metabolic flexibility. So let's talk a little bit like what does flexible metabolism look like in real life and like how do ketones actually do the work there?
You want to talk about that, Brandon?
Sure, sure. I'll jump in. Well, most of us, like, we're very familiar with our primary fuel source, and that's for the majority of the population, sugar. That works fine until your blood sugar drops, but then you hit a wall, that 2 p.m. crash. We've all felt it. We've all known it was coming, and it's a horrible feeling when you're in it. We work with a lot of athletes, whether it's cyclists, runners, you name it, and the dreaded mile 20 crash, the epic bonk climbing up power line. You guys are obviously familiar with Leadville. Um,
Yep.
that's your body with no backup plan. When ketones take over, it allows your body to get comfortable burning fat as fuel. So it's switching your metabolism from carbohydrate metabolism to ketone metabolism. So you're not completely dependent on that last meal to function as a human. In real life, that means that, you know, we get busy throughout our day. It means you can skip lunch and still be sharp at 3 p.m. You can do a long workout. David, you can host a number of classes and you're not feeling completely cooked mentally. It means getting
Mm.
through your afternoon without having that third, fourth, fifth coffee that so many of us are accustomed to. Your body has more options. We just have to expose it to these options and allow it to be utilized as fuel as a resource.
Yeah.
I think for our listeners, what would be helpful too is all right, we break it down. All right, we have two different options here. We can do the 12-ounce fluid ounce can, or we can also do the shot. When we are thinking about the amount of ketones that are in the can or the shot, what would be optimal within a day's period? Because I know the taste was a thing that you spoke on earlier, Deb. On that now is something that is palatable. So meaning that I could drink 4 or 5 of them, but that might not be recommended based off the amount of ketones that I'm getting within a day. So what would be the recommended amount of ketones within a day?
Well, for general use, at least one a day.
Okay.
Um, but there isn't a real practical limit unless you're starting to talk about 15 or 20, and even that isn't a big issue. I mean, a lot of the clinical, we have a kinetic Pro line, a clinical version as well,
Mm-hmm.
that's highly concentrated. It's available through through healthcare practitioners only, and
Mm.
many practitioners prescribe 80 grams of ketones per day for people with, conditions where they really need that metabolic support. So for for you and me, one or two a day. I'll have one in the morning. I'll
Yep.
have, to get my brain activated and in the flow. I will have one after a workout,
Mm-hmm.
particularly a long workout. I'll have a can of kinetic after a long bike ride or something, because, you know, my brain is taxed, my blood sugar is low. And when I have a kinetic, I don't end up sitting on the couch feeling like a zombie. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
ready to go. Um, so there's also so that's just for, day-to-day focus and clarity.
Right.
Mm.
There's also some really interesting research that was published just last year by the National Academies of Sciences that showed that not only for day-to-day clarity and brain function are ketones important, but also as support for brain aging.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So they found that this was a huge study. It was a $10 million study, and they looked at 19 million fMRI brain scans
Mm-hmm.
for people from ages 18 to 88, so across the lifespan. And they found that in the window of ages 40 to 60, your brain ages at an accelerated rate. It basically drops off a cliff. And that ketones return your brain to that more youthful like state.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason that's happening is because it correlates with HbA1c elevation. So glucose sensitivity decreases as we get older, and our brain can't use glucose as effectively as an energy source. So
Mm-hmm.
essentially, our brain cells are starving. Ketones close that gap
Mm.
because they are so easily used by your brain cells. So
Mm-hmm.
to from a longevity, a health span perspective, keeping your brain cells fueled keeps them young. And so the follow-on study they did, it was an animal study, so it's preclinical. But what they found in mice was that supplementing with ketones in that window, that middle age window, actually delayed or prevented altogether dementia and Alzheimer's.
Mm.
So those conditions begin 10, 15 years before symptoms show up.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And it's related to a brain energy metabolism deficit. You're not getting enough energy, your brain cells start to decline, and that progresses over time into what a lot of people call type 3 diabetes,
Mhm.
Alzheimer's. So maintaining mental energy, maintaining your brain's fuel source on a daily basis throughout your life is really important to, health span and longevity.
Well,
Jamie, I saw you about to ask a question. I want to confirm it. So two a day is okay. Is there a limit? Is also what I keep going back to. And if so, what would you say? Hey, maybe don't go over 40 grams. Like that's what I want to make sure we also advise, or at least give insight to the listeners.
Six
Okay.
six from a an FDA regulatory standpoint. That is what we are, approved up to.
Okay.
That's what the data, the research supports.
Okay. And the holds 12.
Yep.
So that would be 72. You would not go above 70. 72 would be pushing the limit there.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
got it. Well, I was just gonna talk I mean, I'm just thinking about this all everything happening in the brain. We've done a lot of coverage at Experience Life magazine on cognitive health, on Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all these things. We talk a lot about, like, that low level inflammation that often is happening in the brain that can it's like a brush fire, they say, that it can become a fire, right, and lead to longer or bigger issues. And I'm just thinking about, like, the cellular repair piece of this because I do think you mentioned earlier, like, preventing the oxidative stress and that I mean, that is cell damage that's happening versus the cell repair. So Brandon, maybe you can speak to that for a moment. How do ketones help with that like getting right down to that cellular level? Because you don't I mean, there's so many things where like, oh, it almost seems too good to be true, but like there are these things that can help with that to the point that you made about antioxidants, Devin, earlier.
Sure. Well, I just want to touch on one thing before we move forward, and how it relates to athletes. And so I got involved in the exogenous ketone space in 2019, when we were selling ketones to the world tour. So think Tour de France riders, and these
Mhm.
athletes are typically putting 20, 30, upwards mid 30s of hours of training on their bike. And what we've learned, at least from that population, we see it in bodybuilders and so on, that they're usually the early movers, before the science catches up. And a lot of
Right.
these athletes, they were noticing that in hour one, their body was very efficient in absorbing and digesting carbohydrates. Hour two, a little less efficient. Hour three, so on and so forth. And if you were to look at that metabolic curve of distribution between burning glucose and burning ketones, early in the event, athletes were primarily 90+% burning carbohydrate, really efficient, really powerful. So you think of a sport where an event that has a fast start, you want that high octane fuel. It's when you get in these longer distance events, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, you're racing unbound at 10 hours. Halfway through that event, 4 to 6 hours, your body is starting to burn carbohydrates at a much less efficient rate. And that's where these exogenous ketones really are beneficial, where athletes we're working with athletes at hour four, that's when they start to supplement into their routine because they know they're starting to have some glucose deficiencies, and ketones just work so well in that state. When you have that inflammation, they're easy to process, and they have that clarity on board. So just wanted to bring that up before we move forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I just think about even those athletes, whether it's somebody who is in their 40s and 60s and they're seeing that brain decline, or it's an athlete who's pushing their body, and that we do know that that has like the wear and tear on the body too, right? So if we get back to that idea of cellular repair, like what is the role of ketones there?
Yeah. So cellular repair is it's an emerging area, and I want to characterize the science accurately. What the research suggests, and this is still earlier stage mechanistic work, is that ketones support the body's cellular maintenance systems, autophagy,
Mm,
including how cells clear out damaged components and renew function. Um, so, the practical takeaway is that ketones might be supporting your biology at a level beyond just fuel and immediate performance. That's part of the reason the longevity angle is so compelling.
right.
Um, the research is still young, but it's pointing in a really exciting direction.
That's awesome.
Devin, I can speak to our Frisco location as far as so many people have been just in flocks of folks going towards kinetic and in the shot more specifically, usually early in the morning. I coach in the 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. classes. And within the benefit of what they're doing within that shot, a little bit more concentrated. But so many of them, I would say 3 weeks, 4 weeks out, talking about a lot of the mental clarity, a lot with their performance throughout the day. So, what variants, if any, of you can share, is the difference between the shot versus the 12 fluid ounces?
Yeah. So the shots are you're getting a concentrated dose very quickly. I've noticed personally that the shots are, I mean, I just notice the effect more acutely with the shots.
Mhm.
And I think it's because you're getting a, a more concentrated dose.
Mhm.
Um, it's interesting that you say, and it's interesting that you say that over time, 2, 3 weeks, people are realizing that, wow, this, is making a huge difference for me. For a lot of people, it can take a little bit of time. It's very
Mm,
different than it's the opposite of caffeine where you develop a tolerance
Mhm.
and it works less and less over time. You
mm,
drink more and more. Ketones are the opposite. The more you drink them, the better they work
yeah.
because your body's developing those metabolic pathways to actually use them more efficiently. They become this is where metabolic flexibility comes into play because you're using them. Your body learns how to use them better. So yeah, the effect builds.
Mm, okay.
Well, and that actually just takes us right into the next thing because what you're referring to is consistency versus like sporadic use, right? And why is that? Why does that like you're explaining why that matters here? I mean, do you think, is it taking it for 3 weeks? Would you say like this is just part of your regular routine? Like we're going to do this on an ongoing basis every day? Because I do see like I'm a kind of person where like I'll have one day and I'll skip a day or two and then I'll take another one. Like is that going to help me or not?
It'll help you in the moment
Right.
for sure. You know, if you're feeling foggy and you want your brain back, yeah,
Mhm.
it'll help you in that moment.
Yeah.
Over the long run, you know, the signaling benefits, the metabolic balance and health benefits are really best if you're consistent with it
Right.
because it's a source of fuel that you use and then it's gone. So if you want a consistent source of fuel for your brain because you've got a brain energy gap because you're in midlife and you've got a glucose bottleneck, then yeah, you want to provide that consistent source of energy so that your brain works optimally.
Right.
Additionally, the signaling benefits are present when you've got ketones in your system.
Mm,
So the inflammatory support, the antioxidant support, all of
Mhm.
that comes from consistent use, and that those benefits build over time.
Right.
mm,
Well, I think, David, it just goes back to what you and I talk all the time about on this podcast with so many guests. It's like be consistent,
yeah.
you have to practice, right, for it to become a
Hmm.
habit and all these pieces. So it's it's one of those things. It's just like how you work out. You're not going to work out one day a week,
Yeah, the
and think you're
reps,
going to get
the
good
results you
results,
want.
right?
Yeah.
So
The
anyway.
reps matter. I mean, it makes me think. And once I want to ask the question too. We have so many different ways of like measuring progression here. Like I use the example. We got like a metabolic test that allow us to know, what our VO2 max is and how efficient we are at burning fat versus carbs. Deb, just within your background, Brandon, you could chime in on this too. Is there a way that we can do maybe a baseline cognitive test
Hmm.
and then, let's say 3 months later, come back and actually see how I'm more cognitively like efficient or better in the space? Is there a test out there that can measure that?
It's funny. That's a great question because I love measuring things. We
Hmm.
li- we literally we just built internally a test and we're going to launch it on our website. It's a Stroop test. It's a standard test that measures, mental reaction time.
Mm.
Mm.
So we're gonna be experimenting with that and make it accessible to everybody, assuming that once we get the bugs worked out. But that could be a cool way to do it. We're also um, that reminds me of an interesting case that we're working with right now. Matt Hughes, I don't know if you've heard of him.
Mm.
He's a UFC fighter. He
I
was
was
a
gonna
nine
say, sounds familiar.
yeah, nine-time world champion. He he was if you're a UFC fan, you know Matt Hughes because he really helped to build the sport. But he in 2017 was hit by a train. He was
What?
crossing the train tracks in his truck and the train hit his truck and he suffered severe traumatic brain injury, like
Mhm.
the worst kind. He was in a coma. A lot of people didn't think he was going to come out, but he's a fighter, and he came out of it, and he's recovered um, pretty significantly compared to what everybody thought would happen. He still struggles with speech and balance and emotional regulation, but but his recovery has plateaued a bit. We connected with him and said, you know what, I think we've got something here that might be able to help you out. And we brought him to the Gray Team, which is a veterans organization we work with in Boca. They work with veterans who are at risk for suicide, and
Mhm.
they have a world class brain health center down there. And so we did some brain scans with him and measured before and after drinking ketones. The before scans using a WAVI, it's a QEEG scan, so it measures brain activity. The before scans measured almost none. It was they were the overall brain voltage was very low. 45 minutes after drinking Kinetic, it was off the charts.
Wow.
If I could show you this, I have an image of it. If I could show you that, you would see, a dark image of a brain and a bright red image of a
Mm.
brain. The difference
Wow.
between a non-responsive and a fully active brain. It's incredible. So
Bring it on.
yeah, it just turned the lights on because
Right.
again, the his brain cells now have the resources that they
Mhm.
need to work because similar to as we age in with traumatic brain injury, there's a glucose metabolism bottleneck,
Right.
and
Mhm.
ketones overcome that. They go right past that bottleneck and fuel your brain cells. And so we're working with him over the next 6 months. He's on a protocol of Kinetic daily and tracking his progress. So exactly to your point, can we measure, the before and after? We're doing that with him. He goes through a number of standard cognitive and you know uh, evaluation tests, and so we'll be tracking that as we go. And the
Mhm.
hypothesis is that with um, with adequate resources in his brain, recovery will improve, and that those tests will show it. Just in the day that he was with us, he was like, yeah, I feel smarter. And anecdotally, he tests himself every day. He asks himself, what did I eat for breakfast yesterday?
Mhm.
And similar questions like that. And he's already noticed that he's having a much easier time with short-term memory recall. So
Wow.
yeah, it's pretty profound. It's really cool.
No, that's real cool. And just knowing like I'll speak candidly as far as like my father's had two, I think it was two or three strokes. And then just knowing like his fast score and just speaking to my mom and she was talking about how like he's in the mild stage and like core memories and all those things are things that he's used to from a structure standpoint, like coaching and all that. It's like second nature. But anything that like numerical math, things like that is kind of like not clicking.
Hmm.
So when you say that, obviously I'm selfishly thinking of him, but I'm also thinking of other individuals who have any kind of brain trauma or strokes or anything like that of how this could be a great benefit to them. So that's interesting for sure.
Yeah.
David, we have a coworker whose father's had dementia for the past 30 years, and he had childhood seizures when he was younger.
Mm,
And recently, we had her give him some Kinetic Pro. Um, and it was the first time in 3 decades that her father was able to recall a childhood memory of her and her sister. It was literally the
wow.
most transformative moment. To witness change like that after so much time, to see improvement like we're seeing in Matt Hughes and others, it really gives us hope that there's opportunity. Even we actively support athletes post concussion.
Hmm.
That's one area we're really looking into, but we're starting to learn that we're able to even make change years and even decades after the fact.
Wow.
Well, to that point, I mean, obviously, we're talking there's the daily use for the everyday person like myself or David or any of us here, but you mentioned the pro, and you mentioned earlier, like, it's there are doctors on the clinical usage side that are doing this. So you mentioned TBIs. What are some of the other, like, metabolic dysfunctions where doctors might be like, almost prescribing it clinically for people?
I'll give you another really interesting kind of case that's close to us. It's to As a general answer, it's for really anywhere, any condition that has a metabolic or cellular dysfunction at its root. So Josh, he's our head of sales, and he came to us because he had an experience with his
Mhm.
daughter in
Yeah.
Kinetic. His daughter has a rare condition called PDCD. It's a childhood condition, and she is not able to metabolize glucose or protein effectively. 3 years ago, she was at the end of her life.
Mm,
And our doctors didn't have any other tools in their toolbox. They
yeah,
said, it's time to start planning for her funeral. There's nothing more we can do. They
Mhm.
put her on palliative care pain medication to ease her passing, and Josh didn't give up at that point. Josh is an incredible human, by the way. Uh,
Yeah.
and he found Kinetic. He and his wife found Kinetic and started giving it to Lily 4 times a day. A week later, uh, her blood tests came back normal. Her organs were no longer failing. She was off all of her pain medication. And she, 3 years later, is now in school, and she's developing at 3 times the rate of a normal child her age. She's in catch up
Mm.
mode. So, um, having, so, and those are the types of stories that really keep us going. I mean, kinetic and ketones are really good for everyday performance and for maintenance of long-term health, but they can be life-giving in many cases.
right.
So I'm excited about the potential of ketones in general in the clinical space. It's still early,
Yeah,
in order to really establish them as a standard of care, a lot of research, human clinical trials need to be done, um, and that's in progress right now. So, but the types of conditions that are very promising are, in addition to traumatic head injury, stroke, um, cognitive decline, mild cognitive impairment, um, Alzheimer's. My dad has Parkinson's. He uses it. That's a similar degenerative condition that comes back to brain
okay.
um, metabolics. And cancer is another really interesting one as well, that there's a lot of research going on with right now, because cancer cells, they use glucose
Mhm,
uh, to survive. Typically, cancer cells cannot use ketones as a source of energy. Ke- um, so as an adjunctive therapy to traditional, chemo and radiation, ketones have been shown in many cases to improve those outcomes, reduce the side effects of those types of therapies as well. So part of that comes down to the fact that ketones actually lower blood sugar levels,
Mhm.
and when you're going through a cancer treatment, you want to keep your blood sugar levels as low as possible. So a
right.
lot of a lot of physicians prescribe a ketogenic diet, just cut carbohydrates out altogether. Kinetic exogenous ketones is a really helpful tool in that process because it lowers your blood sugar. You can actually see it if you wear a continuous glucose monitor. You can see your blood sugar go down, but it offsets that with a clean source of fuel that
Mhm.
cancer cells can't use. So there are lots of exciting kind of there's a lot of exciting potential in the clinical space as
Yeah.
well.
Awesome.
It seems like an area we're just gonna continue to be watching and hearing more about in the coming, months and years probably.
Another area, yeah, I think so. I absolutely believe that. Another interesting use case is um, for women in menopause, peri, and
Yep,
postmenopausal. So there's a direct relationship between estrogen and glucose metabolism. So after menopause, estrogen levels can drop 90%,
yep,
and it completely changes your brain's relationship with glucose.
yep,
You develop that similar glucose bottleneck, and the number one symptom that women report in menopause is brain fog. And so there's a lot of research, new and emerging research that connect the two, that decrease in estrogen, decrease in brain or glucose metabolism, and ketones again bypass that to fuel that starving brain when it doesn't have access to the resources it needs. So that's another really exciting and important use case as well.
Hmm.
absolutely. All right, David, I'm seeing you're about to say something. I can see it.
No, no, no. I mean, I know we covered a good amount. We covered a good amount. So, is there anything else that you want to leave our listeners with that we did not hit on?
I think the question we often get is like, how do I get started? And
Yes.
Hmm.
it's simple, right? Like start with a can, start with a shot. Take it in the morning when you wake up, or take it during your most demanding part of the day. It's like Devin has already mentioned, it's not a stimulant, so don't expect to get a jolt like you would from coffee. What you're going to feel is much smoother, much quieter. Uh, think about the times during the day when you start to lose steam, that 2 a.m. crash. Are you more
Hmm.
fluid? Are you more focused? Are you able to do work while keeping the focus, keeping the distractions out? That's where we really see the benefits of ketones. Um, some people, they'll notice it when they take it on day one. Others, it will take a week or two to start to see these patterns. But when it clicks, it's super steady energy. Instead of these peaks and crashes, you'll be sharp later in the day, and when you normally be fading. Uh, that is why we love it, and the biggest benefits we're seeing with the product.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's well said.
Devin,
All
anything to
right.
add?
I was just uh, I was just at a meeting, sort of an all day kind of offsite with a colleague of mine. He was like, I was introduced to ketones through cycling. He's also a cyclist. He was like, I had no idea that you can, that these are good, uh, on a daily basis. But now, I can't get through my afternoon. I don't want to get through my afternoon
Hmm.
without it.
Mm.
I used to not want to eat lunch because it slows my brain down. Now I just have a kinetic afterwards and I keep going.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
yeah, it's pretty versatile.
That's awesome. All right,
All right. I
David.
got my mic drop. Yes, mic drop moment time. You ready for it?
Oh yeah.
Okay. 5 years from now, where do you want Kinetic to be positioned in the health and fitness industry?
Ooh,
Mm. Yeah, 5 years from now, I want I want kinetic to be and ketones in general
Hmm.
to be, you know, recognized in a similar way that protein is recognized now as, an important part of our nutrition strategy.
Hmm.
Brandon.
I tell Devin all the time, and anyone who will listen, I think ketones have the opportunity to be the single most significant beverage in the history of mankind. I know
Mm.
it's a huge statement, but what we're seeing in the research, what we're feeling anecdotally, it's just, they're so transformative, they're so special. And we're just, we can't share this with enough people.
Hmm.
Awesome. Well,
That's good
thank
stuff.
you. I
Yeah.
mean, we had one of your doctors, now it's like I know her name, and this is where I'm like, I need a kinetic right now because her name is not coming back to me right now. Why is
Dr. Yurt?
Yes, yes, Dr.
Yeah.
Earth was here with us, and she was fantastic. That's been one of a really highly listened to episode, and
Yes.
so just thinking, like, if people wanna learn more, kind of like, she really got into the weeds with us on all of the things with the ketones as well there, so we wanna point people to that episode. We also want
Hmm.
people to know if they wanna learn more about Kinetic, they can visit drinkkinetic.com. It's Kenetik is how you spell that, and you can learn more there. Anywhere else you would point people to? Instagram, any of the socials?
Yeah, you can find our Instagram, Be Kinetic, on
Hmm.
Instagram.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. Perfect. Well, Brandon, Devin, thank you both so much for joining us. We're so happy to have you.
Thanks for having
Yes.
me.
Appreciate y'all.